Welcome to the secret lab on Grolnok, the Omnivore. We have another spooky frog from Innistrad. This makes me very happy. So let's go and talk about Grolnok. So we have Grolnok, 2 mana, green and a blue. Then whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Whenever a permanent is put into a graveyard from your library, exile with a croak counter on it. Then you may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own and exile with croak counters on them. So one of the big things to take away from Grolnok is basically Grolnok is just this big bag of holding in frog form. You're going to have this very own exile zone that's only yours. It's going to have croak counters on it, and only you can interact with it. So, when you play a graveyard deck, people can exile your graveyard. One of the good things about Grolnok is it just gives you this dedicated area where you have your own little stuff to pull from, and that's going to give you a ton of value. Now, as far as the creativity in building Grolnok, you're going to have a lot of room for creativity. You can go Frog Tribal if you want to. You can go Enter the Battlefield Tribal. You can go Laboratory Maniac win condition. Whatever that is. The main thing from Grolnok is that it is a value engine. It's going to exile those cards and have them off to the side for you to do whatever you want with. Now, as far as the actual support cards for a deck like this, cards that go directly towards supporting Grolnok, it's going to be right in about the middle. You don't have to have a lot of cards that are going to be duds without Grolnok on the battlefield, but whatever the core package of your deck is, it needs to have a distinct flavor. It needs to have a distinct taste to it if you really want to take advantage of Grolnok's value engine. Just have some sort of cohesive game plan in the core cards of your deck. Outside of the timing, this is going to be a early and often commander. You want your frog on the battlefield, but whenever your Grolnok enters the battlefield, it's going to have a little red light that circles. Your opponents are going to want to get rid of Grolnok. So, since this is an early and often commander, you're going to want to have some sort of way to protect Grolnok, or at the very least, just have a lot of ramp in there. That way you can keep recasting it. You do not get to cast those cards that are in exile with a croak counter without Grolnok on the battlefield. And especially this is a commander that you're going to have out a lot, so you want to have some sort of protection, or at least some sort of way to ramp to make sure that you can recast Grolnok if it gets hit with some sort of spot removal or a board wipe. Now, Frog Tribal. You can definitely build a Frog Tribal with this deck, but let me say this first. There's only 32 frogs in Magic, and that doesn't include Changelings. So there's only 32 frogs in Magic, and then when you cut it down to Simic colors, blue-green colors, there's only 23 available frogs to you. The Frog Tribe in Magic is not a very well supported card. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run frogs in your deck. If you go super heavy on Frog Tribal, make sure the other parts of your deck are very strong to help support them, because there's just not a lot of overlap between the other frogs. Spore Frog's going to allow you to kind of fog out some combat damage. Barrag Befuddler's going to have a flash option. You have a Bushido Frog. You got Plaxcaster that's going to give some Shroud abilities. Omnibean's going to allow you to turn some of your other creatures into frogs. You have Frog He-Myth, which is just, look at that card art. I love it. At the end of the day, the Frog Tribal aspect. And also you have Haze Frog, Galloping Lizrog, Trollbred Guardian. At the end of the day, if you're going to go Frog Tribal, it is very clunky if you're just going to go purely frogs. Now, one of the ways that you can kind of help smooth this Frog Tribe out is by running Changelings. These are going to help get you some of the early threats down. One of the main things that I would think about in this deck is that your frogs aren't necessarily going to be a huge threat. You just want to have something that's going to allow you to get that milling option. So these Changelings are really going to help you out. Bloodline Pretender is going to give you that option of choosing a creature type and getting some of the extra +1 counters on there. You can also run stuff like with Changeling, which is going to give some other options to turn some of your other creatures into frogs that are not frogs. Realm Walker is going to allow you to look at the top card of your library and cast it if it's the chosen creature type, but like I mentioned, there's not a lot of frogs out there, so hitting a Realm Walker off the top of your library might be a little suspect. And there's also Maskwood Nexus, which is going to allow you to create those Shapeshifter tokens. Now, I will say this. Frog Tribal seems like a lot of fun in a deck like this, and you can build it. If you do end up going Frog Tribal, have fun. The main thing I will say this is just don't worry about your win percentage. There's nothing wrong with building an obscure tribe and having a lot of fun while doing it. If you try to associate your win percentage with an obscure tribal deck like this, hey, have fun. You're building Frog Tribal. One of the other ways that you can really amplify the frogs on the battlefield is by running stuff like Herald's Horn, Coat of Arms, and Vanquisher's Banner. Coat of Arms. If you get this down with a bunch of frogs on the battlefield, you've won the game. You may not be able to close it out, but I promise you, if you end up with about 5/5, some 6/6, some 7/7 frogs, it's going to scare everybody at the table when you have these huge amount of frogs and they have a huge power and toughness. Toss in some trample effects, and you're going to have a great way to close the game out. One of the other things that you definitely want to incorporate in your deck building in a deck like this is having some sort of way to copy Grolnok. You know, if Grolnok gets hit with some spot removal, it's going to go back to the command zone, that commander tax is going to go up. Having some sort of cheap way to make a copy of Grolnok that's not going to kill it because of the legendary clause is a wonderful way to make sure you always have access to your frog bag of holding. Double major, spark double, same thing with Helm of the Host. Whatever it is, you know, if you're running 1 or 2 of these in there, at least incorporate some variation to make an extra copy of Grolnok. That way you can always have access to that exile zone. You can also run the Sakashima package in here, have Sakashima enter the battlefield. This is a great way to, let's say that we've gotten Grolnok on the battlefield, we exile Sakashima, we can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of Grolnok. That way we're running 2 copies of it. You know, it's kind of like backing up data. You know, you always want to have it in 2 different places. Having 2 different copies of Grolnok on the battlefield is going to make sure that the party never stops and you always have access to your bag of holding. You also want to incorporate protection in here. Lightning Greaves, Sylvan Safekeeper, Swiftfoot Boots. You're going to have some sort of hardline protection for your commander. You can run some of those mono blue instants that give your creature hexproof, but having something that's going to get exiled that's protected, that way you can always draw from it and cast it out of exile. You want to have something that's going to give you protection going into the late game, and permanents are going to be one of the best ways to do that. Now, one of the important things in a deck like this is making sure that you have a very good mill package, and especially having some sort of diverse mill package. Now, this is going to be a little bit more situational, but you can run stuff that's going to make copies of creatures and turn them into frogs. So let's say that you have a board state of non-frog creatures. You can use something like Polymorphous Jest to turn them into frogs, swinging at the opponent that has nothing on the battlefield, end up with a ton of milling options, once again feeding Grolnok. Whatever that is, you know, being able to turn your creatures into frogs and get some quick mill action, that's going to be good to include in your deck. You also want to include some instant and sorcery ways to mill. You know, if you have all of your milling tacked onto permanents, it might be hard for you to get that going. Otherworldly Gaze, Increasing Confusion, Dream Twist, these are all great ways that if you don't have them in your hand, they do get milled, you still have that flashback option. And especially with Increasing Confusion, you almost want this to be in the graveyard. That flashback is going to double that X ability and give you a ton of access to cards. Outside of the instant and sorcery, you also want to make sure that your creatures have some sort of mill option. I promise you, get down Hedron Crab early, get down Grolnok, start making land drops out of that exile zone. You will feel the power of Hedron Crab. Hedron Crab is one of the most powerful creatures in Magic if you're trying to self-mill yourself. Imagine you have Hedron Crab down, you go for a fetch land, that's 3 cards into the bin, you crack the fetch land and get another land on the battlefield, that's another 3 cards, so you made 1 land drop, get 2 lanes onto the battlefield, that's 6 cards into the frog exile zone. Hedron Crab is an all-star. Play it. I love Hedron Crab. Same thing with Hermit Druid. Hermit Druid is going to give you access to a ton of cards, you know, especially if you're not running a ton of basics in there. You can also set it up to where you just mill your stuff out entirely if you have no basics. So, you know, if that's something that you want to go for, it is available. But Hermit Druid is going to be a very, very heavy hitter in the mill option. And then some other stuff, you know, Deranged Assistant. It's not going to give you a ton of mill, but you're going to be able to add some colors mana to your mana pool and get a little bit of milling. Outside of the creatures, you also want to run some variation of, you know, enchantments or artifacts, Jace's Erasure and Fraying Sanity. Both of these are a little bit situational. You know, you have to get a card draw to get that card into the bin with Jace's Erasure. Fraying Sanity, if you have Fraying Sanity down and you have a way to get the mill going consistently, it is a great way to really amplify that milling option, but if you're a little bit slow in the milling area, it might be hard to get that going. Mesmeric Orb is one of the best ways to self-mill. You know, let's say that we're on turn 5 or turn 6, we have 5 or 6 lands to untap. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. This is one of the best ways to just dump cards in the library, and at the same time, it's also going to target everybody else at the table. You know, people are trying to set up stuff on top of their library or they're tutoring for cards. Mesmeric Orb makes for a very messy game for your opponents, and it makes for a very messy game for you, but you care about having a messy board state, you want to mill. It's going to be very good with Mesmeric Orb. Now, as far as the non-frog creatures that you're running in a deck like this, you want to have something that has enter the battlefield style effects. You're going to be able to get some extra value out of that exile zone. Reclamation Sage is going to allow you to destroy stuff on the battlefield. Mystic Snake is going to come out of the exile zone, out of the frog's belly, and counter a spell. And then Riverwise Augur is going to give you some card advantage. You're running a mill deck that's going to put them in some sort of weird exile zone, so you would have permanents that interact with entering the battlefield and giving you some sort of extra value whenever they come down. Now, as far as instant and sorceries in the graveyard, you're probably still going to have some sort of instant or sorceries, so you want some sort of way to interact with that. You know, Eternal Witness, Timeless Witness, you need some sort of way to bring Cyclonic Rift back to your hand or some of your tutor spells, whatever that may be. You want to incorporate some sort of way to bring back instant or sorceries. And also, stuff like Snapcaster, Spellseeker, and Leer. Once again, you know, you're not running a ton of instant or sorceries in here because you want to exile a lot of stuff, but you don't want to have your main graveyard completely shut off without having access to it in some form or fashion. Now, we do have our lands in the exile zone, so normally whenever you're running a mill deck, you're going to be doing Life from the Loam, different stuff like that. You also want to incorporate creatures that allow you to make extra land drops. You've got Azusa, Oracle, and Courser of Crewfix. Whatever that is, you want to make sure that you can get those lands out of the Croak exile zone and onto the battlefield to really help ramp you out. Now, we've covered ways that you can enter the battlefield, you can bring back stuff out of your graveyard. If you're going for a full mill package, you can also go for the win the game with having no cards in your library. That's going to be Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Hey, these are going to allow you to win the game in a deck like this, and it is entirely possible to set up a very easy line of play with this. And if it's something that interests you, hey, hop in there, do it, have some fun. Now, one of the other things that you do want to incorporate in your permanents is having some sort of way to interact with your opponent's permanents. In Kasmina's Transmutation, Song of the Dryads, and Prison in the Moon. You want to have some sort of way to have these off to the side and get rid of your opponent's threats on the battlefield. Song of the Dryads is a wonderful way to deal with Planeswalkers. Same thing with Prison in the Moon. You want to have these off to the side at your disposal and be able to use them whenever. Now, that is going to be it for the deck. As far as any closing notes for building Grolnok, have fun. One of the big things to take away from Grolnok is that Grolnok is a value engine. It's going to allow you to do a lot of busted things, whether it's Frog Tribal, whether it's Enter the Battlefield Tribal, whether it's Laboratory Maniac, win conditions, whatever that is. Grolnok's going to be a value engine. I would just highly suggest running some sort of way to have an extra copy of Grolnok on the battlefield, or at the very least have a very good dedicated extra land package to make sure that you can ramp, because I promise you Grolnok will be a threat at the table, and people will target Grolnok as soon as it comes down because that is just a ton of value. But that is going to be it for the video. In fact, if you enjoyed it, hey, like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.